Hello, everybody, and welcome to the TeacherCast Educational Network. My name is Jeff Bradbury. Thank you so much for joining us today and making TeacherCast your home for professional development. This is the Jeff Bradbury Show, and on today's episode, we're going to be talking to a serial entrepreneur who has not only helped out so many businesses get up and started, but he's going to give you his thoughts and tips on how you can take that business from your idea in the classroom and build it into something special. Hope you guys are having a great start to 2025. There's a lot of great things happening over on TeacherCast. Don't forget to check out all the great action over on teachercast.net and sign up for our newsletter this year. We got a lot of amazing things happening over on the TeacherCast Educational Network. My guest today is a serial entrepreneur and the managing partner of a fantastic company called Bread. I want to bring on today Mr. Robert Grazioli. Rob, how are you today? Welcome to TeacherCast.
What's up? I'm stoked to be here.
I am so excited that you're here. How has 2025 been for you? What is going on this week at Bread?
So far, so good. I think getting collected, certainly energized after the new year. Resolutions are in check. So we're full steam ahead at this point. How about you?
Things have been fantastic. School year has been starting off wonderful. We're almost at that semester break. Lots of things going on. And there's been a lot of shows talking all about entrepreneurship, building your brand, building your business. And I'm excited today to talk to you guys about a few different things as far as building startups, building teams. I got to ask you this question up front. If there is an educator listening to this episode who has an idea and says, look, I love doing the classroom thing, but I have this concept. I want to start a podcast. I want to start a business. I want to break out. I want to be a web designer. What advice in 2025 would you have somebody who's looking to kind of take that left turn and start their own little side hustle?
Yeah. I mean, this is probably the most useless advice you can give, but the reality is just start doing it is probably the hardest thing to do, but the most important thing to do. I think any other advice really only becomes relevant after you do that first thing, which is just start doing it.
And I think that's the advice that resonates for me as much as anybody else. You know, just start doing it. I always suggest just make great content. You see a lot of podcasters that I want to make a podcast. What microphone? I want to build a business. What's the application?
Yeah.
But if you're going to do something, just start doing it. How did you get started?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think my entrepreneurial journey really starts, I was a networking major. So I had an internship. I was on this path to basically help companies configure their internet internally. And my boss comes into my cubicle. He had a doctor friend who needed a website and asked if anyone knew anyone who could help or if they could help directly. I had no clue how to build a website, but I said yes for some reason. I said yes. And that's my version of just start doing it. I think I just had this inkling that I should have been doing something else. I had a friend who could build websites. And so I said yes. And that very weekend started learning how to build my first website.
That is a very common story that we have here on the podcast, which is I just started it. It stumbled upon me.
Yes.
What was that like, right? Like you're sitting there going, I have a deadline. I have a client now. How am I putting this together?
Yeah.
I know for myself, I started doing this. The next thing I know, somebody said, you're a business.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. Well, I think,
hobby to,
well, so maybe taking a step back too, something I hear often is people often like looking for permission or feeling like they need permission to do the thing. I think that's something I struggled with early is even though I had started a business, I had a hard time even saying that I was a business owner or that I was an entrepreneur. I think for whatever reason, it took me a while to settle into that reality. So one, don't wait for permission, I think maybe is some additional advice to just, in addition to start doing it. But obviously it's a challenge. You're learning a lot all at once. You're putting yourself in really uncomfortable positions. But I think for me, I found that I really enjoyed being in those positions. The challenge was something I wasn't used to. And that's sort of what kept me at it, I guess. I don't know. Did you have a similar experience in podcasting?
Every single day. You know, we talk a lot here about imposter syndrome and trying for things. And then even here, it's you're doing this, but should I be asking for money for things? Is there a time where you should put your hand out and you realize, oh, okay, you have triplets. It's time to be thinking about this stuff, right? So there's a lot of different things. And, you know, again, the concept of imposter syndrome is real, especially in education. You're talking professionals who get up and talk for a living.
Yeah.
Yet many of them, even some listening today, don't find that they are good at being a speaker,
Yeah.
which I always thought was interesting, right? Like my entire job is get up and speak, yet to be a guest on a podcast or be a featured presenter, that's when they kind of have that imposter syndrome pop up.
Yeah.
So what
Interesting.
was that moment for you when you were like, okay, no, this is my thing. I can do this. I'm do the Stuart Smalley. I'm good enough. I'm smart enough. And gosh darn it, people like me.
Yeah. I'd actually say it took me way too long. So first business was in college still. I mean, that certainly contributed to that. Is I'm working with people who are probably a decade older than me, who have real professional experience. I have none. But I am coming up in a time where technology is still quite new. Web applications were still new. Mobile applications were new. So there weren't really experts in that field in a sense. And I could be at least considered something like that, but it was hard for me. I would say not until midway through my second company did I start to feel like I knew what I was doing in any sense of the word. So it really took some time. It took a lot of mistakes. But I also think that feeling is useful sometimes, wouldn't you say? Like it helps,
you have to
helps me.
believe in yourself.
Sure. Yeah.
And
you definitely need to believe in
teacher
yourself.
can
Yeah.
see that, right?
Yes.
I've been asked to teach classes that I knew the subject matter back and forth.
Yeah.
And then I was asked to teach classes where I was learning it on the fly. You know, I got 2 degrees in music, but
Yes.
I was asked to teach a middle school course in Broadway history. I didn't know anything about Broadway history. So like you lean on what you know and you fake it till you make it on the other
Yes.
subjects.
Yeah. I think that people with different levels of comfort in that pretending. I mean, you do have to sort of pretend sometimes and just drum up the confidence to speak with conviction or attempt something with conviction. And you look back at that moment maybe, and you'll really not be happy with the work output from that time period, but recognize that this journey, whatever it is that you're on, is in fact a journey. And if you're doing it right, you're always getting better. You'll always be somewhat disappointed with what you've done in the past. And that just means you're getting better. So
one of the things that I know that you're a fan of is this concept of having patience. And
yeah.
I know for me and building out the TeacherCast brand, I've always played the long game. You know, it wasn't, I want to make a podcast, where's the dollar? It wasn't, I want to do this at a certain level, how much is the microphone? There's a long game in here, and you're building relationships, and you're putting in that work, and you're being seen at conferences doing 100 different interviews at all levels, or in my case, you're not seen at conferences because you're doing the backdoor method and you're having all the meetings with people off the floor.
Yes.
Why is patience and playing that long game important when you're starting here coming up with a way to build your empire?
Yeah. Well, one, I think it's how most success happens, whether you like it or not. So if you go into any project or initiative or idea with that mindset out of the gate, one, I think you're just going to set yourself up for more, a better time, honestly. You can't just snap your fingers and have success over. This is a common phrase, like the overnight success was built in a decade or something like that.
Yeah.
I forget what it is exactly, but it's super true. And we have this concept internally at Bread we call boring magic. And it's very much in that same vein, where we really try to emphasize spending time on these things that are laying foundational work for a business or an idea versus spending time trying to find quick wins that maybe make you feel good in the near term, but aren't really helping set you up for longer term success. So, I think it's, you have to move quickly. I mean, time's limited, budget's limited, but just having the patience to one, see things unfold versus like expect an immediate outcome is super important.
I find a lot of my successes come because of the things I happen to know, not because of the passions that I'm trying to reach for. As an example, these kinds of conversations, you and I talking about business and entrepreneurship, only came because of this journey that I've been on, not because I started a podcast wanting to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Because I've been able to learn these topics, now I can have a conversation with you about it. And then that opens up a completely another Pandora's box that I can now bring and frankly that is more lucrative to my business than the thing that I'm actually running towards, I find.
Yeah, totally. I think that's also super common in entrepreneurs too. I think very few people set out to run a business, but they realize at some point that that's what they're actually doing. Like maybe you set up to talk to a person or to do a thing. For me, I wanted to make things. I just found joy in making things, and at the time it was websites. And ultimately, at some point, I realized I am a business person, and to that point, having the conversations about taxes, about payroll, about hiring, about managing people, you accidentally kind of stumble into something else where I transitioned my identity from, oh, I'm a designer and engineer to I'm a business owner. And that's actually what I am. And that's what I enjoy. And that's why I'm having this conversation with you. It's not about my design chops. It's about running a business.
I think there's a difference, and I love your opinion here, between a business owner and an entrepreneur.
Oh, totally agree. That's a great distinction. I'm curious what your perspective is first, honestly.
When I first started, I never took it's not that I didn't take this seriously, right?
Uh-huh.
But this was just my way of learning things. You're an expert. I have to go teach a subject at a conference or something. I'll bring you on. Now I know something at least about it. It's my personalized professional development, essentially. Mm-hmm. Now I can go and be smart somewhere else. Next thing you know, you turn around and you have companies saying, can I be on your show? Okay, well, that's a thing. Mm-hmm. Next thing you know, you have people asking for sponsors. Oh, I guess this is a business. And then you realize that a podcasting sponsorship business turned me into a website development business, turned me into, I'm now helping people get their email systems set up. Now I'm working with people building their own brand. So, I've always looked at myself and my story going, am I the Steve Jobs of this organization, or am I the Wozniak? Because on one hand, you have to be able to sell, but on the other hand, you have to sit there and solder it and make it look good.
Yeah.
And which sock are you wearing at a particular time? That is the difference. I look at Wozniak going, he was the business owner, but I look at Steve Jobs and go, he was the entrepreneur.
Yeah, I think there is a distinction. And I also use the word business owner intentionally for that reason, because that's very much how I view myself. I sort of get my kicks from the operating portion of a business. I think the muscle around like that risk taking, the vision pushing, I think that's something I've kind of fallen into, and it's a muscle that I've developed and had to develop over time to push a business forward when you're kind of in that founder seat. But it's not my default setting, if that makes any sense. I definitely identify more as that business owner archetype, the make it work, the nuts and bolts type of person. But as a entrepreneur or as a business owner, you will do both things. You will be, I like the sock vision more than the hat vision. You'll certainly be wearing both socks all the time. And I mean, we touch on team a little bit, but I think that's what also makes managing a team in that environment really challenging as well. Because that's another sock that I think most entrepreneurs aren't ready for.
That is the next step here, right? You have this idea, you have this thing, it's going, right? Like it's moving, but you can't do it all yourself. Okay, maybe this is a little therapeutic for me here, right? And there is a time that you say, I need to get help with this, right?
Yeah.
And again, we're talking to teachers here. Not everybody has a third income to support their second income, right?
Yes. How
do you take these ideas and start to scale them? And where do you go? Because I have so many, I'll say in quotes, startup founders. But we're talking today to fifth grade teachers. We're talking to high school teachers. We're talking to administrators. We're talking to people who they're not moving to Silicon Valley. They just want to build something that can support their family. What advice do you have to those people who are looking for something and just need a little bit extra help?
Yeah, I think, while I operate in the venture world and a lot of people I work with have gone out and raised venture capital, so they have money, I don't think it makes it any easier, honestly, because even if you're able to afford amazing talent, there's still this reality of people and personality and responsibility and vision and all of that. Those are the important things. So the first thing I'd say is I've been really lucky to have 5 business partners that I've worked with for my entire career. And having partnership and having people who you can share the experience with has probably been the single most impactful thing for my entrepreneurial journey. So finding trusted people, whether they're part of your business or not, that can at least listen to you when times are really challenging and understand what you're going through. And also being open and vulnerable about those challenges. One, I think like that's baseline help, is just the psychological support that's required when you're sort of going out on a limb. So that's like the first level of help, is you don't hire anyone to do the actual work, but at least have people around you who can listen to you complain. I think that's probably critical. But to more tactical things, I don't know, this can get pretty, again, I'm a very nuts and bolts type person. So for me, when I require help and I can speak for like what works for me. I think having general advice around this topic is challenging because everyone's different. And ultimately, the core principle that I like to work with when I'm working with anybody is being brutally honest with myself about what I'm good at. I write it down and I share it. And anybody I work with knows exactly what I'm good at and what I believe I suck at. Pardon my crassness there, but I'm a crass person, and that's one of the things on my list that I share with people. So one, I think that's my starting point. Is I clearly write down my expectations for what I need based on who I am, what I'm good at, and that at least gets me in front of the right people. And then from there are tons of other conversations you need to happen. But step one is identifying what you're good at, what you're not good at, and then at least starting to talk to the right people. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think that's a start for many people. And, I've been very fortunate enough through the podcast to have been able to meet people. We have a recording, we have a conversation. We have a conversation that turns into dinner. We have a dinner conversation that turns into an opportunity. Next thing you know, you have a Yoda on your side, if you will, right? You've got somebody that you can reach out to that, at least in my case, they might not be in the education field at all, but they've walked that mile before me at a much higher level, right?
Yes.
And so for anybody out there, having those people, building those networks, I know for educators, that's where things like your Microsoft networks, your Google networks, your ISTE networks, like all these little professional learning communities, having other people around is fantastic. And even the ones that aren't official, I mean, I've got a number of podcasting communities or entrepreneur communities of just teachers who are out there trying to build a little side hustle, support their family. These are important things to build. Talk to us a little bit about some of the workflows, right? Like, you can't do this alone.
Yeah.
I'm constantly in search of the next way to automate things, do things easier, upgrades, if you will. What are some of the things that we need to be thinking about that maybe, instead of me doing everything, this application can handle it, or this system that you found works really well? I can't tell you how many nights a week I'm sitting here going, I can't make content because I've got 175 emails that came in. Like, what are some of your secrets to actually keep your life moving away from the business through the business?
Yeah. I mean, this is something we at least internally have jargon for that we call stack. What's our stack? There's like your tech stack, and these are our personal stacks, which we care a lot about. And it's something that at least me and my business partners have always cared a lot about. And we're constantly sort of learning from each other in this respect. So like, one, be obsessed with your stack. I mean, any kind of professional pursuit, if you're treating it like a craft, you should always be refining your stack. Think about like a carpenter who's been in the business for decades. They have all these jigs, all these tools that they've made for themselves that they use to work faster, to work smarter, and to be more profitable, and open up time to do other things. So like, your stack is everything in your craft. So I'm a very technical person. My stack generally requires me to have a tool that I can write in constantly. Writing sort of core to my operation. Everything I do, I document quite a bit. I write both in narrative form and in like technical form if it's a plan. So like have a great writing tool. I choose a tool called Notion, mostly because it allows linking between documents. That's really useful because I like to break down my thoughts into like very small chunks. So that's very core to my stack. I'm not sure if teachers will be so familiar with Notion, but I think the world is now. I'm not really sure, honestly.
We'll come back to that in a second.
Okay. Yeah, but I don't use Word. I think maybe is sort of the crux of that one. We use Slack a lot internally. There are, I think, Microsoft Teams now, like that's sort of a pretty common thing. So I rely a lot on synchronous communication. We live in a remote world now. Our team is primarily remote. So getting really good at synchronous communication has been really important for me personally. It's opened up my life to be able to be in many places. I don't always have to be in the office to be productive. And then 3 is a calendar tool. I use a tool called Amy. You can use other calendar tools, but I basically live and die every day by my calendar. It's basically, if it's in there, if you put a meeting in my calendar, I'm going to show up. And I try to block out specific work time. So like really having a tool that allows you to control your time. I would say like those are my 3 core stack items. There are tons of other things that are like for programming and for design, but like things that are more universal, those 3 tools are super important. And I'm constantly assessing their effectiveness and value.
About 2.5 years ago, I found Notion. And changed my life. I talk about it constantly. I'm one of those guys, right? On this show, like, if there's an opportunity, it's there. For those who are looking, you can go to teachercast.net/store. I've got a few Notion templates up already for teachers and for coaches and for administrators. So I've kind of dabbled in entrepreneurship, right? Kind of dabbled in that area too. But for me, yes.
What turned you on? What was the switch that flipped where you realized Notion was the thing you were missing? Sorry?
Search.
Yeah.
Right. Teachers, we live in a Google world and we live in a Microsoft world, and all of that stuff is great. And I pay for the Microsoft business license. I even pay for Copilot. I don't pay for Google, but that's because there's no reason for me to go in that direction. My domain is a Microsoft side, right? Like all those different things. But when I found that I can take a blank Notion world and I can create anything that I want, any way that I want, that started another obsession, right? Because now I'm a tinkerer. You can see all the Lego behind me. Like this is an extension of my Notion brain and stuff like that, right?
Love it.
It's the how do I build something, and the fact that Notion even says they're Legos for the mind and like all that stuff. Absolutely. So then I started saying, well, if Notion is helping me, maybe it can help you. And that's when I started building out Notion templates for other companies.
Yep.
And you just see that starting to move out there. To your point, I don't think that educators have found Notion yet.
Yeah.
And I know that because every time I mention it to somebody, they go, what is that? Now, this is not going to be a rant on Notion, but Notion does have a problem where a couple of years ago, I was trying to use it for a school district of mine, and I actually asked them, will they sign student privacy agreements? And they said no. So there's a limit to what the educational foundation can do.
Of course.
But honestly, I love with Notion the fact that it's all searchable. And this entire podcast, everything about TeacherCast is on Notion, using Notion AI. I wrote my upcoming book is all in Notion. It's all designed there. And the fact that they're coming out with the calendar features and the thises and the that's, it is that one application that I said to people, I probably pick it up 150 times a day. Before we were recording, I'm sitting here writing my middle school curriculum in Notion through all the Notion AI features. And then I put it out into a Google site, or I turn it into a slide deck or something like that. But just the fact that everything is there, invaluable tool. And oh, by the way, it's an $11 billion company.
Yeah, incredibly valuable. Their whole thesis is trying to take, so as an engineer, it's like sometimes you feel like a wizard because what's in your head, you can create. And I think their main attempt is to bridge that gap for people who aren't programmers to be able to create what's in their head. I think people do this naturally. There just hasn't been a ton of tools to do this. I used to be an avid note taker. Like everything was handwritten, and it's mostly because I couldn't be constrained to just like words to describe what I was doing, or I needed structure to my words that wasn't just like line, and word was too limiting. So everything was by hand, and I had notebook after notebook after notebook, and that is all gone now, basically replaced by Notion. But I think a lot of people do this in whatever career you're part of. They have their own system for doing things well. And I think it's important to find tools that get you as close to what's in your head as possible.
My only downside to Notion is now that is the obsession. Like I don't know.
Notions for Notion's sake. Yeah.
Is that right? Because and it's like websites.
Yeah.
You build your first, and I'll give you the good example here. I redesigned the TeacherCast website around this time last year. Mm-hmm. Found a theme I really liked. Then I made my Jeff site, and it was better. Then I started doing that theme for client sites, and that's better. Then that's better. And I have to go back to TeacherCast and go, well, wait a minute, I now know a lot more. Let me update the team. In other words, I'm spending all my time building websites, and again, I'm not building the content out. That's where I come in, and like that's where I'm looking at this going, yeah. And I say this to all my clients, like, I'm going to make a great website, but please remind me constantly that the website I'm building for you is not my business. I need to focus on the business. I didn't mean to make this podcast be a therapy session. But
nah, I mean, I think they frequently turn to them. Exactly. Yeah. It's great to have people to vent to, right? We just talked about this. So, yeah. But what was the thread? How do we get on Notion?
How are you doing? I think was the first question. No, but I mean, look, let's kind of go through that, right? We have this thing we're trying to do. We're trying to automate the system. We now build our systems out, and now we need to make our systems work for us, right? I mean, that seems to be where it is. You have an idea, you run with it, right? And you said that at the beginning. Yeah. Just keep doing it. And then eventually that consumes you. And it's no different than we talk about the steps. You got to fill the bucket up, and then you live in the bucket. Then you got to fill the next bucket. You got to live in that bucket. And for most people, it is that how much water do you need for each bucket? Yes. If this is still making sense, guys. But the more that you contribute to all this, the more you're going to get out of it. And I think the advice I'm going to give, and I'll ask you for final advice on this for anybody. I always say, just make good content, whether it be a blog post, whether it be a website, whether it be a podcast, whether it be an app, whether it be whatever it is, just make it the best that you can. Rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. You've gotten yourself into multiple ventures, companies. You're always learning from the previous one. You're always building off the previous one. Final question here. What is the most teachable moment, or what is the best teachable moment you've ever had as an entrepreneur? Something that you just kind of hit you, that little lightning bolt, and you're like, that was awesome, or I learned something, or I'm going to take that, or I'm going to remember that. What is that teachable moment that always is there for you as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, there's one moment that always comes to mind. It was pretty early in my journey. And there are a million teachable moments. I mean, every moment is basically a teachable moment, especially early on when you're doing nothing that you don't know what you're doing. So if you're not learning, you're not doing the right thing. I mean, that's a common trope, but it's true. But there's one moment early on. In general, we started my first business, and my business partner started a services business. We took profits and we tried to invest those profits into new ideas that could become product companies. One of those product companies had some legs, and we raised venture for it. But like somewhere along that journey, we were not managing our pipeline very well, and we were spending all of our excess cash as soon as it came in the door. So all of a sudden, one of our bigger clients dropped off, and we didn't even put up much of a fight. We just assumed there'd be the next client, and there wasn't. And we were staring at a run rate that was not high enough to really support our existing employees, and we wanted to all continue to pursue this other idea. So we had this huge dilemma around how to basically stop the bleeding, stabilize the business, and then and then eventually transition the business into this new one. So it was a weird situation to be. I was 22 years old, hadn't run a business before. Like, I am ill-equipped. I was ill-equipped. I would like to think I am more equipped now, but I was not prepared for that situation. I tend to be very vocal in these moments. I tend to pretend like I know what I'm doing. And one of my other business partners tends to be a bit more reserved. But for whatever reason in this moment, I didn't have any of the answers, and he did. And he stepped up and crafted a plan that really helped us navigate our business through that moment. And it was the first time I sort of learned how valuable shutting up can be, not being the voice in the room, not having all the answers, and knowing what situation might be better suited for other people to handle. So like that always stands out to me, is that like, I'm just not always going to be that person. I'm not always going to be the one with the answer. And sometimes the best version of myself is the one that knows when to take a step back and let someone else drive.
That is very good advice for anybody out there. We're especially with entrepreneurs, we're always trying to prove, we're always trying to show, we're always sometimes just let the room talk.
Yeah, absolutely. And learn to trust people, right? That's the other little nugget there, is trusting people with your business can be hard. Sometimes you just got to do it. Yeah.
I'll give you that story off camera too.
Cool.
Robert, where can we learn more about the great things that you're doing? And especially tell us a little bit more about Bread and how we can get in touch with you guys. Yeah,
of course. So Bread's a venture fund and a service provider mostly for early stage businesses. You can find us at madebybread.com and just feel to reach out through the site. You can also go to my site. It's just myname.com, Robert Grazioli, and reach out to me there. I love meeting new people, talking about businesses, whatever it is you're doing, or design or engineering, whatever it is. That's really it. Please reach out. I'm not one of those people who won't respond, and looking forward to hearing from you.
You can find all these links over on our show notes. You can head on over to teachercast.net/podcast to check everything out. This is episode number 64 of the Jeff Bradbury Show. And one more time, Rob, I want to say thank you so much for joining us today on our program.
Oh, it was awesome, Jeffrey. Thanks, man.
And that wraps up this episode of the Jeff Bradbury Show. On behalf of Rob and everybody here on TeacherCast, my name is Jeff Bradbury, reminding you guys to keep up the great work in your classrooms and continue sharing your passions with each other.